Hi, everyone. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the easiest things to do to make money in today's environment. Joining us today, we have Zack Scott. Zack is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner. He acts as a fiduciary in that role, which is an important designation. And he's also the president of Castellan Financial Group, based outside of Baltimore, Maryland. Thank you for joining us, Zack.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty timely given inflation and all these things happening in kind of the macro environment, about the number one thing you should do with extra cash these days. And when we were talking before leading up to this, Zach, you said this is one of the most common questions you get from clients these days. So what is the number one thing you should do with extra cash these days?
Sure. So absolutely. One of the most commonly asked questions that I receive from my clients is, what do I do with a little bit of the extra cash that I have sitting around in a checking or a savings account? And for those clients who aren't necessarily willing to stomach the risk of the stock market, it is absolutely worth your while to learn more about high yield savings accounts. Savings accounts haven't really been relevant for a long time, but they are now relevant. And there are several institutions that offer north of 3% without any fees on a savings account. So if you aren't aware if your bank in your savings account has a higher interest rate, definitely something to research.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's gone from something that for so long and basically for all our whole lifetimes has been like laughable um, yields to something that's actually real now, generally over 1%, especially in these high yield savings accounts, which is great. But you really should check because there are a lot of big banks that are still paying like 0.01% on a savings account, which is not competitive if you look into it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's essentially free money for dollars that are just sitting there otherwise. Even if it's your emergency fund, it's worthwhile holding that in a place that's going to give you a little bit more bang for your buck, rather than an institution that's only paying you a tenth of a percent. That makes no sense.
Totally. And so what else can folks do outside of high yield savings accounts or savings accounts parking cash in like a bank versus other cash or cash like investments?
Sure. CDs are also very popular right now. There are, I've seen several clients come to me with different offers that their particular bank is making with a higher interest rate than what's been typical, sometimes north of 5%, even for less than a year in a CD. To those clients who are exploring that, I would just consider the time horizon of the money that you have. If there is a chance that you might need it before the duration is over of the CD, before it fully matures, then I would consider just opting towards the high yield savings account, because you do have that 2 month interest penalty if you have to take the money out before full maturity. But those are definitely options. I've also seen something different with that you may not necessarily think of off the top of your head with clients is their insurance. Actually, with rising interest rates, a lot of insurance companies have actually lowered their rates on both life and disability insurance. So if you have a policy already, or if you haven't implemented one, but you've been meaning to, now would be a good time to research that, because prices seem to be lower than they have been in recent years.
So why did that happen? Is that because of like the Fed funds rate changing, or do you know why?
That's the explanation that I've been given personally. Interest rates are going up, so insurance companies theoretically have, more safe investments, if you will, in their book. So they're able to and willing to offer coverage for a lower rate than they previously were when interest rates were really in the basement. So, from a sense, that particular industry is getting a little bit stronger from higher interest rates, just like you could from using a savings account yourself. It's the same idea.
Cool, very cool. So in a post a few weeks ago on Pasa Dollar, I talked about a few different cash investment vehicles. I ultimately chose a bond fund that invest in short-term treasuries, so like right from the U.S. Treasury. Very safe, but there is one catch. We were talking about earlier with bond funds or ETFs, where versus an individual bond, which personally I find very intimidating because there are so many different types of bonds to somebody who's looking to buy one versus a bond
Hmm.
fund that kind of like wraps it all up in a nice little package, puts a bow on top, and says, "Here you go." Makes it a little bit more simple. But there was one important catch with funds. Do you remember what that was?
It's the fact that the maturities might different, they might be different within the actual fund themselves. So typically when you own an individual bond, you exchange money for, a period of time where you're paid interest, maybe on a monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annual basis. And in exchange, by the end of that period, you are guaranteed to get all of your money back. That's just how bonds generally work. But when you buy a bond mutual fund or you have a bond ETF, there are new bonds being purchased and sold all the time, potentially within that mutual fund. There are bonds that are maturing sooner than others. There are bonds with different interest rates. So people are constantly buying and selling them themselves on the open market. So those positions, although more conservative and more defensive than traditional stock mutual funds, certainly, do still have more volatility, considering the fact that there is no holding them to maturity. They live in perpetuity, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they trade a little bit more like if it's an ETF, they trade a little bit more like a stock. So they're going to bounce around with the market.
Theoretically, less so, right? More
Mm-hmm.
like a buoy in your portfolio rather than the big ups and downs that your typical, S&P 500 mutual fund might have. But yes, it's still based on the shares that are held versus the shares that are in the inventory.
Yep, absolutely. I know this is just a short time that we had here today. Just to wrap up, what would you say is the number one thing? Like clear cut, if you don't do anything else, do this.
Go get a return on the money you have in your savings account, especially if you're in a big bank institution. More likely than not, you're earning nothing. So definitely know what you're earning. And if you're earning nothing, go find somewhere that best suits your needs, whether it's a physical location or an online bank.
Pretty good advice.
It's easy.
Well, Zach, thank you again for joining us today. I want to ask our audience, what do you think? Did we get it right? Let us know in the comments below or on passadollar.com, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks,
Thank you
Zach.
so much.